Hi there. Welcome to Business Leadership Podcast. In this podcast, I interview successful business leaders and industry experts to help you grow your business. I truly believe that sometimes a single insight can completely change your business directions and allow you to achieve your business goals. In this episode, I interview Linda Olson. Linda she's an author of Amazon bestseller Your Story Matters. She's a TEDx speaker and she's also CEO at Wealth Through Stories. During our discussion, we talk about her book, her consulting practice, and also many other items, and also why stories matter for organization and why business leaders should invest time in developing these stories. I think you will enjoy my discussion with Linda, especially when she walks us through, steps for story development process and also the obstacles you will face while you developing your stories. She also shared her powerful, impactful personal story and why she decided to help out other business leaders in their story discovery process. If you like this content, don't forget to share and subscribe to this channel. Until next time, enjoy. Hi guys, welcome to a Business Leadership Blog. Today my guest is Linda Olson. Linda is a public speaker and she's been helping people, business leaders to discover their stories and how to tell that story. I'm looking forward to our discussion, Linda, and I'm looking forward to learning from you, what it takes to build your own story. Thank you so much for your time today.
Oh, you're very welcome. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Okay, thank you. So, walk us through, where when people trying to come up with a story, what they struggle with, and what is the usually process, Linda, when somebody wants to come up with a story, business leaders or anybody, what are some of the challenges they're dealing with?
Well, one of the first things that I came across when this whole idea of story was new to me, and I began doing some research, and I thought, if story is so important, why aren't we all telling our stories every day? Mm-hmm. And the number one reason I discovered is that because most people don't think they have a story. And and then if they could come up with something, they don't really think anybody would be interested in hearing. And thirdly, that if they came up with a story, they have no idea where to start, how to tell it, and how to create it. And I knew at that point that was my new calling. I knew that's what I needed to do. And going back to that first area of we don't think we have a story, let me tell you very quickly, everybody has a story. I believe everybody has a story that can impact lives. And one of the key ingredient to story is conflict. So, you can't watch a movie without seeing a lot of conflict. In fact, they draw us in generally right at the beginning of the movie. And often there's some traumatic event that happens and then they'll kind of unfold and, hopefully we end up with a happy ending or some kind of good ending. Yeah. But it's that whole idea of conflict, and none of us need to look very far to recognize that we've had conflict in our life. In fact, in some respects, depending on how we define conflict, we probably identify and relate to conflicts every day in our life. Because conflict doesn't have to be this big, ugly thing. It could be a conflict that has gone on for months and even years sometimes, and maybe hasn't resolved from our past. But it could also be a simple decision-making kind of thing. For example, I can be running out of the house and suddenly can't find my keys. Well, of course I need the keys to, drive my car and, look everywhere for the keys. Well, that becomes a conflict for me because they weren't where I normally put them. And, so we have to decide then, okay, what are my options? Do I call Uber? Do I, is my spouse available? Is her car available? Or does she have things going? Or, whatever it is. So conflict can be as simple as that. But generally, when we're talking about our story, then we want to go deeper into our conflict. But just to know, everybody has conflict. Everybody has a story.
So is it one of the reasons people don't have they don't think they have a story? Because conflict is emotion that you don't want to visit, because that's a difficult emotion to visit. Somebody's gone through conflict and they overcome that over the time, And do they really want to go visit the conflict piece over and over? Is it one of the challenges building stories, because that's emotions you don't want to revisit over and over, but that's where the best stories lies?
That's a very good insight. You know
Yeah.
what? Conflict is generally related to pain, some kind of pain on different emotional levels.
Mm-hmm.
And our story is really, it's not the conflict, it's what we've learned through the conflict.
Mm-hmm.
And so here's another way to find story is that, and if we, are kind of hesitant about looking at some of the conflict in our life, look at the biggest victories that you've had in your life.
Okay.
It may be getting a career, it may be choosing a life partner, it may be having your first child. There's many things. Maybe you've just had some real success in business. And the thing is, we all know that didn't happen overnight.
Yeah.
So then you can look at what was the conflict building up to my success, to my victory. And we can trace, and it doesn't have to be, big things or going into a lot of detail. But even if we kind of nail down 3 significant conflicts building up to that, because part of it is stories. One of the number one reasons that story is so important is because it's about connecting with one another. And the way we connect, unfortunately, because of the broken world we live in today, the way we connect is through pain, through problems, and through conflict, because everybody relates to that on one level or another. And their circumstances may be totally different. Your circumstances may be totally different than mine, but I can relate to the pain that you've gone through. And that's how we connect. And so that's why if we just talk about our victory, a lot of people today are not experiencing a lot of victory. There's been so much significant loss, even in this last year, for so many people, that you start telling them all about your victories, and it's like they just shut you out because they can't connect with that, but they can connect with the pain.
So that's been done from many years. Telling story and connecting with making a human connection with the people. Did that change over the time? Anything change in that, or is it the same way our ancestors did that? They sat around the fireplace and told the stories, war stories, and connected with each other. Is that process the same, or anything change in that, the way we tell story, or anything, the structure of a story change a little bit in a business world, or is it the same process over the years that we've been doing over and over, just connecting with the people through stories?
That's a very good question, because as you know, stories is nothing new. It's been around for thousands of years. We did connect through stories. We may not have had a specific pattern or framework in terms of using story for business. We connected story on an everyday basis, but the idea was, the purpose was still to connect with one another. And so I don't think the purpose has changed, but perhaps the format is a little different. And part of it is, it's kind of like we're just kind of waking up to story now. I think, I don't know if we've been asleep all this time or what, but it's because we're relating differently in business. Sales has changed. It's no longer, we still have our telemarketers and everybody else, and most of us are, so quick to hang up the phone if we do pick up one of those calls. But because the difference is, it's about building that relationship. And our parents, our grandparents, our great-grandparents, you know what? We need to go back to the way they did it, because they knew how to do it. I grew up in a small farming community in Canada. And, I'll tell you, my dad was kind of a jack of all trades. And if any of the neighbors needed help, he was right there. But if he needed help, they were right there as well. And you just dropped everything and you went, especially if it was, kind of an emergency or whatever. And they knew how. And I thought, we had hired somebody, and I thought, I got to get some pizza or something. I got to feed this guy. I
Mhm.
said, anybody who came to work with us for all day on the farm, we always fed them.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
it's still ingrained in me. I thought, no, I've got to feed these guys.
Yeah, yeah. It's so true what you just mentioned that, I don't have a very clear memories of my grandfather, with the all the stuff he did in World War II. But I still remember the stories he told me about that, when he went to war, what happened. So those stories are so, it's like he told me yesterday, but, I don't have other memories around it, how he lived his life, what he did, during his early years. But I still remember the stories and the wars he was telling me, over and over. So that stories didn't change, even though he didn't have a structure around the stories, but the message was clear. We connected on those stories. I think that's so true what you just mentioned, that those stories kind of, we forget a lot of events in life, but we don't forget stories.
We don't forget stories. You're absolutely right. That's a very good point, because stories is really an experience that we share with one another. And when somebody shares their story, it's like we're experiencing them. And that's what we
Gotcha.
remember. We remember experience.
Gotcha.
Research has said, one point I researched it, and it said we remember 7%, only 7% of what we hear, 23% of what we see, and 70% of what we experience.
Mm-hmm.
That's why we remember stories.
So when
Yes.
somebody telling story, we can living through our own experiences, the same, that story what's been told, and that's how we relate to. Very interesting.
Yes.
Very
Yes.
interesting. So let's talk about business world. How that why stories are important in a business world, more than on a personal side. You mentioned sales and some business development or any brand building. Why stories are important. I know a lot of big brands, they will all tell stories, right? They have some sort of story to tell, right? So why that's important to connect with the people.
Well, and that's exactly it. I think you gave it away. And that
Mhm.
is, it's about connecting. So, of course, in business, if we're not connecting with people, we really don't end up with a business at all. And
Mhm.
so it is about connecting. We're just connecting in a little different way. You mentioned the brand stories. And I think it's one of the, if not the most important story we need to develop. We put so much often money, time, and energy into building our brand, getting the right icon, the font, the color, goes on and on. But what we fail to do is put the time into having a great brand story,
Mhm.
because it's the brand story that says what we do and why we do it. And it says it in a very concise way.
Mhm.
So when people there's a business principle that says people buy into you before they buy into your story. Before they buy into your product. So whether it's a product or service or whatever you have, people are buying into you first. Well, that is your story. So they
Mhm.
not only want to know all the benefits of the service or product that you're offering, they want to know where your heart is. Do you have a passion for this, or are you just interested in making some money? Because if you're
Mhm.
just interested in making some money, I can go somewhere else. But if I hear your passion, and your passion comes from your story, which is the pain that you initially experienced, now you've caught my attention, because I know what pain is.
Mhm.
And now it's like, okay, I want to listen. Wow, this guy is really passionate about what he's doing.
Mhm.
And, he's gone through a lot to get to this place. So I know he not only has a product to offer, it comes from a heart of passion. Now you've caught my attention.
I got you. So
Yeah.
small businesses, let me use a business as example. So small business or owner-led businesses, owner story becomes a business story. It's easy to probably develop the story, but large corporations where, yeah, it might be an owner-led business, but now they have teams of business people in a businesses. Stories probably, there's multiple stories. Everybody have a story. They need to come up with a brand story. Where do you see the challenges on a larger company or smaller companies, where they're trying to build the stories? Is that, do they, how do they nail down, hey, this is a story that is going to, everybody's going to relate to it. Or on a personal, smaller businesses, it's just one story, they can just run with it. right? Two different approaches. Where do you think that struggles are, some of the struggles you saw working with the people, helping them out?
And you're absolutely right. It's in a small business, it's your story if this is your business.
Yeah.
In a corporation, um, there is that initial story, that founder, whoever started that story, and we often lose that.
Mm-hmm.
So somebody working for a large corporation, they can still share that story, and hopefully it's a passion to them.
Mm-hmm.
Again, the difference is, are they just hired to get a paycheck? Is that all they care about? Or do they actually care about this company? Because if
Mm-hmm.
they really care about this company, they will carry their story and also share why they were attracted to this brand
Gotcha.
and this corporation. Then it
Mm-hmm.
becomes their story. And
Mm-hmm.
that's the best thing they can do. Because again, they're carrying on the passion. They're not just there to get a paycheck. And
Gotcha.
so it can become their story too. It's
Mm-hmm.
like, wow, when I heard, the founder's story and what he went through and why he chose this, I knew that's what I wanted to do too. And
Mm-hmm.
so, I decided I would go to whatever length I needed to get the interview to see if I could get hired. And I didn't care if I started right at the bottom. I would hopefully be committed enough and be able to work my way up.
I
But,
see.
that in itself is a story. And somebody says, I started as the janitor and
Yeah.
I didn't care. I had my foot in the door. That's all that mattered to me because I believed in this company.
Mm-hmm.
And, like I said, then it becomes your story.
So that's very interesting. So it's not the brand story people telling, the staff telling, is their story. They're relating to the brand itself. They're supporting the brand by telling their own story. It's not a brand story that they're telling people.
Yeah, at which ultimately it becomes the brand story, but
Mm-hmm.
it's their own story of connecting to this brand and why they're working for this company
I
and what
see.
it took to get to where they are. They may be a senior manager at this point, and
Mm-hmm.
that's great, but there's very few people that start as a senior manager. Most of them have worked their way up,
Yeah.
and it's been, years
Mm-hmm.
of commitment to getting to that place. But it's
Right.
like, why did they even put that kind of energy and time and investment in? Why
Exactly.
was that important? That's what the brand story is. It's the why. That's
Mm-hmm.
what people need to hear. They need to hear our why.
I see.
Mhm.
Very interesting. So let's talk about the story itself. We go through our life journey for so many years. Is it only one story we're looking for? Because every part of our life there's different stories, right? So when I started a practice, I'll share my experience with that. Somebody had taught me that the best way to build stories is as take a big chart and draw your picture, put your face in the middle, and write all that attributes in your life. I used to play sports, or I used to be employee. Then I started a business, write all that stuff around, and started to come up with the different stories. Is that a so how do you nail down on a one or two stories when you have so many stories to tell around your life that if you live 40, 50, 60 years, there's so many stories. So how do you nail down on a one story that you want to tell over and over?
Okay, good question.
Thank
Yes.
you.
Well, let me just say that there's several different, I don't know if you want to say it, kind of levels of stories.
Yeah.
And I kind of take three key stories. One is, it's kind of our everyday stories. It's things that unfold every day. It's the experiences we have. Something kind of touches our life, and maybe something somebody said to us. It may be a phone call we had, whatever it is. That's our everyday stories.
Yeah.
Those are usually kind of the more lighter, inspirational kind of stories.
Yeah.
Then, kind of what you're talking about is what I refer to as our turning point stories. So if we
Yeah.
had that, and that was a great analogy how you did it. I
Yeah.
don't do it exactly that way, but I love it.
Yeah.
So, like you said, you have your face in the center, and you've got all these different, sports and education and marriage and all these different things,
Mm-hmm.
relationships, and so if you looked at those areas in your life, what were the things that had the most significant impact? That becomes that turning point story.
Okay.
And so you look at it, it's like sports. Okay, well, we can look at when I got into sports, maybe it wasn't a big deal, maybe it was high school, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But especially if I took sports further than high school, college, and so forth, it required a big commitment. And then what stopped me? Why did I stop? And, that kind of thing. So then we can look at relationships. What is the most, or it doesn't have to just be one, but the most important relationship to me? What had the most impact in my life in terms of the relationship? We can go to career, we can go to education. What education do I have? And what did it take to get to that level, that degree, or whatever it is that we may have? So we look at what had the most significant impact in our life. And that will also bring out some of the pain that we experienced in that process. So when we're looking at story, and then before I go on, it's the third area is our signature story. And that's basically a story that carries a theme throughout our life. And even though we still have many of these turning point stories, there's just a theme, something that drives us throughout our life. And that's kind of the big story. And the thing is, even if we know and have a signature story, it's not like we have to tell it or we have to tell the big story all the time. We really break it down to telling our stories in 2 or 3 minutes. 2 or 3 minutes. That's what our stories need to be, because our attention span is so short these days that if it's longer than that, we start losing our listener.
That is so true. Attention span, if you look at even generational time, with the kids coming, the growing, their attention span is very, very small. That's why you see the social media, Instagram and Facebook, it's a couple seconds only, So can you possibly tell impactful stories in 2-3 minutes? Can you make that impact, or do you need more time to tell powerful stories?
Well, I'll tell you, I worked with a high-end coach for a couple of years, and when my personal story is actually a 45-year journey. And when she helped me tell my story in 2 minutes, I knew I had learned the power of story.
Wow.
And I never told story the same again. It was like it changed everything for me. And in this last year, I've actually been training a handful of people where I've been teaching them how to do their 1 minute story. Wow. And to actually to grab the interest, share your vision, your dream, and make that impact in 1 minute. Wow.
That's very powerful. If you can tell stories in a very short time, I think that has a lot more impact than telling a longer story, because nobody has the time to go through the whole story, right?
Exactly.
So when you're looking for the impact, how deep you need to go to the, is it simply looking at that as, how I changed my life, how I see the impact of that, or do you need to go very, very deep down on a spiritual level and find a true impact that made on your spirit and then tell stories? So how deep you need to go, how many levels deep you need to go to find that impact of the story?
Well, it's that again is a very good question, because we can impact people sometimes many times in ways we just don't even realize. Here, let me just tell you a very short story that I heard I think it was last week. Okay. Somebody had said, this lady worked at a cafe, and an elderly woman came in, and she sat down and she had a cup of coffee, and the waitress just came up to her and she just chatted with her a little bit. And she could tell the lady seemed very grateful that she talked. And when the elderly lady left, she left her a tip and she left a note. And she said in the note, "This is my first outing since my husband passed away, and I didn't know how I was going to just go out to eat by myself. Thank you for being there with me." And I thought, wow, that waitress, I'm sure, had no idea. She was just being herself and being kind, but she impacted. And so, in a sense, it was a small story with a great big impact.
Mm-hmm.
When we're talking about our personal stories, sometimes it's just about reaching out, and often we just don't even realize maybe who we are impacting by something we've said or whatever it is. But if we truly want to make a big difference on a bigger scale, we have to be willing to go deeper into our story. And
Mm-hmm.
the hard part about that is the hardest part about truly making an impact is that requires us to be vulnerable. And when
Yeah.
we're vulnerable, there's always that risk of, stepping out, and are we going to be rejected? Are people going to accept this? And it's hard. And the other part is that sometimes if we've gone through significant pain in our life, we haven't necessarily always embraced that pain.
Mm-hmm.
And that will make the difference in terms of how deep we can go with our story. And it will also make the difference in terms of how we can impact others.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, the being vulnerable, that's I think one of the challenge. I experienced that challenge. About 8 months ago, I was thinking about when thought about I'm going to start a YouTube channel, and putting yourself out, definitely you've been vulnerable, and I was so hesitant, and I spent about 3 weeks trying to not do it and trying to perfect it. I want to make sure that it's perfect before I will let it out. But then I realized that I'm trying to, what I'm afraid of is being vulnerable out there. I'm going to be critiqued, or somebody's going to say, well, this is not right, this is not right. But I think that stays with you, and only way I found to overcome that is just repetition. Just let it out. Let people say whatever they want to say, and I think that piece probably holds a lot of people back. Would you say?
Absolutely, it does. And good for you for
Okay.
recognizing what was holding you back. We can't make the change before we're first aware of what it is. And the
Yeah.
thing is, see, we do often want to, step into that perfectionism. And that's just about, we want to be accepted.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to hear all the criticism and so forth. But isn't that interesting that with story, more than anything today, people are crying out to hear the authenticity.
Yeah.
They want to know that you're real. They don't want to know that you're perfect. They want to know that you are real, that you make mistakes, that, no, what you offer isn't perfect, but that you're growing and willing
Mm-hmm.
to grow and willing to step out. That's what they want to know, because it's like it gives somebody else permission. If you're vulnerable and are willing to take this big step, not knowing how people would respond or react, then it kind of gives me permission to think, wow, if he can do that, and
I
he
can do
didn't
it.
have a lot of experience, and maybe I can try that too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And also gives me a little bit road to do whatever I want to do. So if you've gone through certain step to get to where you want to get to, now have some sort of roadmap or blueprint to follow you, and I can be in that same place eventually if I keep working at it.
Yes, especially if you've gone through enough of that where you actually have, like you said, a roadmap, and can teach someone else and say, you know what? I learned so much through this journey that what I'm offering is, it may be a webinar, it may be, a couple of workshops, whatever it is, so that you don't have to go through the struggle that I went through to get to this place.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, absolutely.
Wow, very interesting. Um, what do you think changed in what we've gone through with the COVID and all that time for the last couple of years? Eventually, definitely people gonna have a lot more stories to tell when this thing's over. Definitely everybody's gone through personal challenges, health challenges, or family challenges. Many different angles. Where we can look at it. Where do you think that a lot more stories to come? I think what people have gone through over the last couple of years.
Absolutely. We can't go through what we've been experiencing in the last year or two without changing our story. What we have to take a look at is, how is it changing my story? Unfortunately, I see so many people caught up in significant fear and pain. And so if it's changed their story to become more fearful, they've probably withdrawn, they feel like they're locked up at home, they can't connect and so forth. But I honestly don't believe it has to be that way. Now with the internet and everything else, just like we're doing today, there's such significant ways through connecting. And however, I hope that in the process, that at least the majority of people will recognize, if I had known 2 years ago what I would have gone through, I would have, just wanted to quit. But because I went through it, I am stronger. I am more courageous. I'm willing to step out and take risks. And I know I can do this. I know I can do it.
Wow. Come out stronger. Come out even stronger.
Yeah.
So interesting. So let's talk about business leaders. Business, definitely when this COVID stuff is over next year and everybody wants to go back, they need to build and this is a time I'm doing it. And I'm sure a lot of other business leaders who are watching us today, they're probably going through the same thing, and they trying to plan next year what they're going to do. Story is one of the things, they need to come out, there's a root of all the marketing, all the sales material they develop. So what would you suggest as steps taken by any business leaders who needs to build the stories, but they're not there yet, how to build the stories? So they're starting from a ground zero and they want to work their way up. So what would you say, where do they start and how do they go about it?
Okay. All right. So there's a couple things that I really believe I would encourage leaders as they want to grow and to build is to get deeper into their story. You can do that by obviously research and finding trainings and so forth. My book, Your Story Matters, became an Amazon bestseller in 7 countries in the first 5 days. 3,000 downloads. And I was pretty blown away. And I thought I really had to step back and I'm thinking, wow, what is it about this? And I think the overall message, your story matters. People need to know that their story counts, that it matters not just to them, but it matters to many people around them. And so if we're willing to go into the depth of story, and I've outlined a lot in a simple kind of way through that story, so that certainly can be one way. Let me give you a basic framework for story so that, because I believe, obviously we talked about, telling our story in 2 or 3 minutes. I believe one of the things that we need to learn in business is to simplify. Most people, their plate is full and overloaded and they're already overwhelmed. So the last thing we want to do is put something else on their plate where when we're overwhelmed, as you know, then we often just stop and do nothing.
Yeah.
And instead, we just want to give them these bite-sized pieces. So it's that simplicity. Simplicity, someone has said, simplicity is the secret to clarity. And clarity is the secret to success. Mm-hmm. And so if we learn to simplify, and so what I've done is I put a simple story framework together. And we talked earlier at the beginning about conflict being that key ingredient. Well, behind every conflict is a resolution. And I call that our story pathway. Conflict resolution. Behind every resolution is a new conflict. And behind that is another. So that's a very simple story pathway. And the only other thing we really need is an introduction. And so it's introduction, conflict, resolution. And if we were to take, say, 2 minutes and break that down as a basic guideline, our introduction should be about 25%, our conflict about 50%, and our resolution about 25%. So we spend the majority of time in the conflict. So the conflict may be 3 significant statements that, that have taken us, and then, and then things turned around all of a sudden, So our introduction, the best thing we can do, and the introduction is very key, even though it's only 25%, we want to take people right into that moment. So we don't say, like, even, for example, if we're a speaker, and I'm sure you've heard it many times, we've all heard it, And
Hmm.
that is somebody gets up and they say, oh, I appreciate so much coming here. I want to thank so and so and so and so, and go on and on. We've just wasted 5 minutes and we've lost half our audience right there.
Hmm.
And instead, if we can get up and say, I was only 14 and faced the worst day of my life. Well, now these people are just sitting at the edge of their seat saying, oh my gosh, she was only 14. I mean, I wonder what happened.
Yeah.
And they want more. So
Hmm.
that's what we want to do with our 2-minute story. We want to put it together so that people want more. We don't have to tell them everything. We're
Hmm.
just introducing it really, so they'll want more. Yeah.
Very interesting. So it's a skill that you have to learn over the time, how to grab attention and stay with attention, Linda. Is a, no matter what we're going through, you want to grab that attention and keep people with you over through the whole story, right? So is that skill learnable over the time, or do you have to practice? How do you go about this skill set?
It really is a skill, just like
Yeah.
anything else. And it takes practice. So once you know kind of these key ingredients, and then it takes practice. And even though I went through tons of conferences and training sessions and worked with some high-end coaches and so forth, I kept perfecting the skill. And I had my 2-minute story down, but it wasn't actually all that long ago when I trimmed it down to 1 minute to really grab attention. And I entered a big contest actually this last year, and I got into the semifinals, which, I
It's
was
good for
thrilled
you.
with.
Congratulations. Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. And one of the guys just in the comment, I mean, this was, on our Zoom calls, and one of the guys, he said, oh my gosh, I wanted to hear more. He said, and I thought, that's exactly what I wanted you to say.
Yeah. Very
Yeah, but
interesting.
it's like any skill, it takes a lot of practice and just getting out there, looking at perfecting it, reviewing it, that kind of thing. Yes.
But it's the same story you're telling over the years, right? You have enough time to keep perfecting it, keep getting better at telling stories. It's your stories. It's going to stay with you for, at the lifetime. So you just get better at keep telling your own stories, I guess, right?
You know what? It is, and mine is a signature story because it was a story that has impacted me my entire life. And I often tell it over and over, but sometimes people will say, there's a large group of people and say there's 30 people lined up. And they say, we've got, 30 seconds. Tell me your story in 30 seconds and sometimes, of course, it's longer. It may be 15 minutes. It may be 30 minutes. I actually do a 2-day story retreat. And
Hmm.
in some way, I carry my story throughout those 2 days. So I tell it in a different
I
way.
see. Hmm.
And even if it's the 2-minute thing, I have several different ways to approach my story. So I don't always do it the same. And
Hmm.
it's interesting because when I was going through this training, and I'm thinking, well, people would be bored if they've heard me speak before. Why would they want to hear it again?
Yeah.
But then I remembered the leader hearing his story. I've heard his story a dozen or more times, and I'm never bored with it. I'm never bored.
So you
Sometimes
change.
he adds new things
Wow.
and, that kind of thing. And recently I've had people who have attended my retreat several times or whatever. They tell me the same thing. They said, you know what? I've heard your story many times, but he said, I always love to hear it.
Wow.
And partly because sometimes we're the listener and the audience, we're at a different place than we were a year ago.
I
And
see.
so now we're listening from different ears.
Hmm.
And yes. Mhm.
So do you add something to your story, Linda, or you change the message according to who's your audience, or what message you need to deliver to people in front of you? So is that you add something to your story, or the message you change because who's in front of you doing the story?
All right. I'm glad you asked that
Thank you.
because very, very key. Even though it's my story,
Hmm.
that the purpose in telling story is about meeting your need, about meeting our audience, our listeners' need. And so
Okay.
what is so important is that we have a good grasp on who we're speaking to. And that's where often we mess up because we just think,
Mhm.
well, wait a minute, I'm supposed to tell my story and this is my story, but it may have nothing to do with what our listener is feeling or experiencing at this time.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, let's say somebody comes up to us, and as we're chatting, we realize that he's a brand new entrepreneur and he's just stepped out of the corporate world and is, I mean, just frightened because he doesn't know how long it's going to take to build the business. He doesn't know if, there's going to be enough income. And if there isn't,
Mm-hmm.
does he have a backup plan to carry him through that transition or whatever it is?
Mm-hmm.
And we can just stop. Now, I may have my signature story, but it doesn't mean I necessarily use that all the time. And I may just stop and say, you know what? Would you be okay if I just shared a simple story? And of course, they're going to say yes, it's okay.
Mm-hmm.
And you say, when I went through that transition from the regular business world to developing, becoming an entrepreneur, I was absolutely terrified. I had young kids, a young family at home. My wife wasn't working because she was at home with her 2-year-old and her 5-year-old, and I had no idea how I was going to make it.
Mm-hmm.
And then somebody approached me and said, "What is the worst thing that can happen?" And I thought, well, I had some savings set aside. And so worst thing is I could dig into the savings. If I lost the savings, if I used that up,
Yeah.
I knew I could get a part-time job while
Mm-hmm.
I still build my entrepreneurship business. And you know what? It answered everything for me because now I had faced my fear and I knew I could do this. And so what we're identifying with is we find out what the pain or problem or conflict of our listener is and share a story that identifies with their pain. And maybe that question will help them as well.
Interesting. So yeah, and they can also go through your experience and relate to, back to what we were talking about earlier, to their experiences and live through the story and have that experience with you, and that they will not forget about it. They will remember that for a long time.
Yes, and in this case, this example that I used, is a similar story of transitioning from corporate world to entrepreneurship. Sometimes it may be altogether different, but they're experiencing a lot of fear right now. So you can share with them and maybe totally different circumstances, but can I just tell you about the time in my life where I was absolutely terrified? And then you just go on from there, and they're sitting on the edge of their seat. Now it's like, wow, I don't feel alone in
Mm-hmm.
my fear. I somebody is here. He understands me because he's gone through fear as well. And even though we know in our head everybody has experienced fear, but not everybody's willing to talk about it.
Yeah.
And now I feel close to this person because they're willing to share their fear with me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Very interesting. So would definitely like to hear your story, Linda. What's your signature story, if you can share with us?
I will share it. And let me see. I'm just thinking about how I'm going to share this one.
Okay.
I will. My dad came to my bedroom door and he said, "You've got to get up. We have to keep going." Getting out of bed was the last thing I wanted to do. The day before was the worst day of my life. My precious 2-year-old brother was killed in a tractor accident. I was the one driving the tractor. At 14 years of age, my first month into high school, I had no idea how I would step out, face my family, face my small community, go back to high school. No idea. The hardest thing I did was getting out of bed and then putting one foot in front of the other. It's the same thing that you have to face every time you come and face a major crisis in your life. You have to keep going. You have to put one foot in front of the other. It took years. It was a long journey. Like I said earlier, it was a 45-year journey to complete healing. But I recognized in that process, in that journey, that every time I felt like fear was behind every corner. And it would be as simple as going to the breakfast table and my family, when communication wasn't good to begin with, and all they would say is, pass me the jam. And their silence felt like rejection to me. But in essence, they were just struggling with their own pain. Because not only had I crushed my little brother, I had crushed my whole family, and my life was crushed. We were just coping, trying to figure out in our own way, how do each of us keep going? And one by one, as I learned to face the fear behind every corner and just experience the pain when it came up, life slowly started getting a little bit better. And then it was years later, because at that point, the hardest thing was there were no support groups, there were no grief groups, there was no professional help available at that time. And so it took years before I got professional help. And one of the biggest breakthroughs for me was when I worked with a professional counselor 15 years after the accident. And she helped me come to a place to forgive myself. And I had buried that so deep, I didn't even know it was there. But once I broke through that, in leaving her office, I didn't drive home, I flew home. And years later, as I came to complete healing, the whole idea of story became new and exciting for me. And I thought, if someone had asked me just prior to that, what's your story? I probably would have said, I don't think I have one. Mm-hmm. But now it just intrigued me. And I began to grasp the power of story. And I knew I wanted to help others with their story. And so my mission today is to impact 1 million people a year through story.
Wow, beautiful. So powerful.
Thank you. Now, I didn't time that. It was probably longer than what I usually, more than what I say, but.
Yeah, but very powerful, very, very, and very, the details you add, definitely you live through that experience, and you can't help you feel that, what you go through.
Thank you. And, there's let me just mention, there's a couple of mistakes that as storytellers, we often get caught up in. And that one is that story is too long. Like I said, if it's more than 2 or 3 minutes, we often lose our audience. Now, let me say something based on that. If our story is longer and bigger, what we can do is we can break it down. When I stepped onto the TEDx stage, and at that point, many of the TEDx talks are like 18 minutes, although many of them are reducing it to 10 to 12 minutes. And where I went to speak, they asked for 10 to 12 minutes. So my story is about 11 minutes. Okay. And what I did was I actually broke down my talk into 5 or 6 2-minute stories. Okay. Now, just listening to it, you probably wouldn't think about that, but it really is. If you listen to it from that perspective, on YouTube, and it's called Your Story is Gold. Okay. If you decide to listen to it, you will find that I really just weaved one story right into another and just moved through the process. So that's one way to do it. Mm-hmm. So if our story is bigger, that's what we can do. We can break it down. We feel like we have to tell them everything. We don't. Mm-hmm. Secondly, a lot of times our story is too long because we're sharing too much detail. Because that detail is important to me, I think that you need to know it to fully understand everything, and you really don't. I mean, I still get caught up. My husband and I are visiting someplace, and we're standing at the door about ready to leave, and I'm telling one more story, and my husband will nudge me, and he said, "Get to the point." So, okay. So then I wrap it up in the next 10 seconds. And so I still, even with all the practice, I still get caught up in that.
Yeah.
And the third thing is what we talked about earlier, and that is that purpose of story. That the purpose is to identify, come alongside, connect with our listener. That's the part of the story that we want to tell, especially when we understand their pain, what they're dealing with. We don't have to tell it all. We can just tell that little part that relates to their pain. Yeah.
Very interesting. Right. Wow, there's so much to learn. Definitely, during this holidays, I'm going to go through that as well. I'm trying to write my stories. I got to start putting a pen to the paper. First of all, I got to start writing so I can start tweaking a little bit here and there. But you have a lot of interesting resource on your site as well. I download your PDF copy of that, the 5 steps to the stories as well. So a lot of interesting stuff. First of all, where can people find, at respective time, I want to make sure that, I learned so much. And, I would recommend all business leaders to, go to your website, connect with you. If you're looking to build the stories, if you're looking to, build your marketing strategy or sales strategy, go through your story, creation process and figure out the stories. If you don't have a story, there's no point putting, money or resources on a marketing and sales unless you got the story to tell, right? So I will recommend all business leaders who are watching, definitely, take a look. Where can people find you, Linda, and how can they connect with you, and how can they take your advice, and how can they work with you?
Well, thank you. Probably the best way is to start with my website, which is called wealththroughstories.com. And it's all spelled out, wealththroughstories.com. Okay. And on that website, one of the resources you mentioned is both the PDF as well as I'm doing a 5-day challenge at my next one is the end of January 31st. And this one is particularly about what we talked about, create a transformational story. Okay. And it's, I consider it $197 value, and it is free. So you can sign up, and it's each day, it's for 5 days. And each day I give one more tip on story and show you how to put it together step by step. And if by chance you're tied up during that time, I will record them, but you do have to sign up to get the information. So I highly recommend that, because it's starting with the basics. We have to start with the basics. And then, of course, my book, Your Story Matters, you can pick that up on Amazon. Okay. And those are probably, 3, key things to start with. Also, on my website, I have a 20-minute story strategy session. It's a free session. If you want to connect on a one-on-one, feel free to go on my website and the homepage, and you can sign up for that. I'd be happy to meet with anybody and just help them with their story. And
your TED Talk is on a YouTube. You mentioned that. So do people want to listen to your TED Talk?
Yes, they can either go with my name, YouTube, Linda Olson, or the name of my talk says Your Story is Gold. Yes.
Beautiful. So I'm going to include a link to all the website and the YouTube, and also your LinkedIn page right below the video as well. And I'll encourage all business leaders to build a story, take a look, connect with you, and take that opportunity to sign up for the 5 days program. And I take that's a virtual program, right? Anybody can sign up. It's a virtual.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah, it's through Zoom. Yeah.
Well, I want to acknowledge your time. Thank you so much for your time. I learned so much, and I'm sure people who are watching, they learned so much from your approach, and I definitely connect with you and build your stories.
Oh, well, you're very welcome. My pleasure. I enjoyed sharing with everybody, and I hope it was valuable.
Very cool. Thank you so much for your time, Linda.
You're welcome.
Have a good one. Bye-bye.
Thank you. You too. Bye-bye.
Hi there. Thank you so much for investing time with us and watching this video. Hope you enjoyed this discussion. For next episode, please don't forget to subscribe to this channel and send your feedback. Until next time, have yourself a great day. We'll talk soon. Bye-bye.